Okay.
Hello, Elena. Hi.
Hi, Dan. How are you? I'm so happy to have you again on my channel. And we can't stop listening to you. Oh my God, you have so many things to say about fundamental physics phenomenons, and it's quite amazing. So today, I was thinking about, well, actually, we thought about it together, talking about portals and stargates. You suggest this topic, and I went yes, because I experienced teleportation. I never experienced a stargate, but I've been told it's the same feeling, but it may be a little bit stronger. I've seen a stargate in space behind Jupiter. I wasn't physically there. It was by telepathy through the eyes of Thorhan. And I could see this bubble of shimmering dark blue, grayish liquid. It's like the movie Stargates, but it's not flat silvering, it's a bubble. It was in space floating. And so I was told this was made with what they call dark energy, not dark matter, something different, totally different, dark energy. That's this dark energy. When I asked what it is, I was told it's the contrary of energy that radiates, where particles radiates energy. It's the contrary. It's every particles are micro vortexes. Instead of radiating, they absorb, and that's implode. So I know you're going to be totally excited about explaining why, and I'm going to be totally excited listening to you. So yeah, and there's a difference as well, was explained about between wormholes and stargates. Different stargates teleport you, and wormholes, it's a shortcut. So that as well. And well, I have so many things to say, but it's not about me telling my small experience. It's about listening to you. So Dan, what is a stargate?
At least we have the right question. I mean, stargates and portals, if we really understand what a stargate and portal is, we also understand more about what it is to survive death, actually. And in fact, the way I would propose that we start to learn about the deep wave mechanic physics of what is a stargate portal is actually to study, or think about at least, the wave mechanic electric physics of the difference between a dream and a lucid dream. Oh. In fact, I propose that only once you understand the actual sort of electric field science of what a lucid dream is, that's the moment at which you have a chance of understanding what a portal and a stargate is. In fact, you know, I think you mentioned, well, you mentioned the movie Stargate, but we're also going to use one more movie here as sort of a metaphor, which is the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, in which she kind of gets inside this dodecahedron, if you remember, and that's one of the animations we have lined up here for our visuals. But she gets inside this dodecahedron and it implodes. And then after she comes back, the question for the scientists is, well, did she have a lucid dream or did she go through a Stargate? And they can't tell the difference. Aha. And, you know, she went and saw her ancestors, her father. Remember, if you remember the movie?
Yes, great movie. Yeah.
Jodie Foster, yeah. And so understanding that those who can propagate coherently into a lucid dream is the very important beginning of learning the physics of what a Stargate and portal is. So that's one metaphor. And like I say, I have some fun little visuals, not too many, but I got some pretty pictures here lined up. But the second metaphor I'd like that we need to be looking for in these pictures is, I thought it was beautiful just now, again, where you mentioned about that the portal itself looked like a liquid surface, right? That's what you said.
Yeah, a fluid.
A fluid surface, yes, yes. And in all the pictures of the Stargate, you see this fluid surface.
Yeah.
Yes, and also we were just talking about the fact that not only did JP report this with Michael Sala going into the the arc in the Bermuda Triangle area. They got in there and they see this suspended large sphere bubble of water. And that turns out to be a portal, literally a teleport device. And you mentioned the water, and you mentioned searing. Somebody else was
Tony Rodriguez, yes, in his book
tells a similar story.
Cirrus Colony Cavalier. He describes he's on the moon and he's sent on a mission to Earth to be teleported on a building from the moon. So they use he is in a room where there is this same, as JP describes it, same bubble, floating fluid bubble, and he sees through it, and he sees, when he approaches, he sees the other side, he sees the top of the building, and
at the other end, at the other end of the door, yeah,
and as he approaches, and then he steps into it and is teleported. And be it Tony describing it, be it JP describing it, be it myself describing teleportation, or be it as well Jean-Claude Moyen's testimony of going through portals and teleportation, we all agree on two things: the sensation of tiny micro needles, like
tingling,
and that it is recommended to drink water.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, and so we need to know the physics. And I would mention, for example, that people who are using strong plasma phase conjugate implosion for healing negentropy, the physics of MedBed, which now is Therify.net, doing rejuvenation commercially successfully in 25 countries, Therify.net. And one of the main ingredients of success is hydration. Actually, hydration and one other thing, grounding, the book Earthing. So that actually, for example, barefoot in the mud or take a shower, earthing or grounding or connecting to earth, which is phase embedding with fractal charge distribution named earthing, which is what grounding means for electricians and psychologists. It has the same meaning with reference to perfected charge distribution, getting in phase with embeddability, literally what physics now calls entanglement, which they agree is what causes portals, which is Einstein-Rosen bridge, the conventional physics terms, which we now know is a longitudinal array, which I'm about to talk about. Point is, hydration and grounding were the requirement because getting into phase discipline with embeddability, which in conventional physics they call entanglement, the prerequisite to action at a distance in conventional physics. And we now know that entanglement perfected is called embedding perfected, which is little donut fits perfectly inside big donut. And that embedding perfected is the problem that what we call phase conjugation, the caduceus imploding waves, solves. They converge at a point. And where they converge, now this is probably maybe the most important metaphor of the evening, where those waves converge at the focal point, literally a phase conjugate point, as in a phase conjugate mirror for ancestor phone calls, or a phase conjugate mirror, the surface of that liquid is called the liquefaction point. Okay. And the liquefaction point is the point at which propagation is achieved, literally acceleration. So at the surface of that liquid, there is a compression point that produces liquefaction into perfected distribution, into what we will later understand is the physics of a longitudinal array, correctly called wormhole physics. In conventional physics, it's called Einstein-Rosen bridge, but it's actually a longitudinal compressional array. Visualize Jodie Foster's dodecahedron and whisper to yourself, inhabit the array. Point is, we want to meditate now. The next few, as I'm going through these visuals, I'm suggesting the meditation is what is happening at the liquefaction point.
Yeah.
The surface of the bubble. You know, I think there's in the movie Stargate, he sticks his finger through, and it's like he's putting his finger through a liquid, but at the other side, you know, it could be light years away. What's happening at the liquefaction point? That's what we're meditating on now as we look at some pictures, and the metaphor is more than metaphor. The physics of the way we'd like to begin understanding what's happening at the liquefaction point, which, by the way, is a compression point. It's a point at which compression is successful. And the compression is so successful, it's Einstein's definition of the solution to Einstein's definition of the solution to the unified field is perfected non-destructive compression. That's the name of the solution to the unified field per Einstein, is perfected non-destructive compression. Of course, he didn't know what a fractal was, and therefore he never had a clue why an object falls to the ground, actually, and neither do Einstein, Stephen Hawking, or NASA. They don't know why an object falls to the ground. So of course they can't know how a stargate or portal works, because they don't know how compression produces acceleration at the liquefaction point. Now, when perfected compression, namely fractal, produces acceleration, the name for that acceleration of charge is called the gravity. So the ability to make that gravity wave is what's called a longitudinal wave at the liquefaction point. And we have the equations from Tom Bearden proving the longitudinal wave is what a gravity wave is made of, a longitudinal EMF. But I'm going a bit fast. You had a question, please.
Yes, I had a question. Well, it made me think about Jupiter, planet Jupiter. The compression in there is so phenomenal. There's not even a word to qualify it, that the gases go thicker, more denser as you approach to the center because of the gravity is so huge. And then it's apparently the only planet they found that in the solar system. The gases liquefy. They go so dense that the gravity liquefy them. So you have a core, liquid core. Nobody knows if there's a solid core in it. Not able to determine yet, but there's this liquid core which is the liquid is created by compression. So
yes,
just made me think about that.
Yes, and in fact, in the graphics that I'm about to show, we're going to suggest an even more powerful stargate, and therefore the source of many wars, in Orion. And we look at the plasma geometry of Orion. Yes, and you'll see in the slides, it's a massive double vortex named Yod-He-Vahe, Yahweh. It's actually the name for opposing light cones, a Yod and a Vav. A Yahweh is the name for a being that inhabits a double light cone. In the Japanese woodcut of the Orion Nebula, you see this great plasma double vortex creating perfected compression at the center. And obviously, almost most of the wars in our galaxy are basically, the subject is the Stargate in Orion, because
yes, the Orion Wars. The purpose was who's gonna get the hold on this special Stargate? Why it's this one? It's unique, quasi unique in the galaxy, because it's a double vortex. It's something that is in the nebula, the M42 nebula, and this is something the nebula hold at the moment. And this nebula can project you somewhere that no other can.
Yeah. It's like the first place that Putin is going to drop the bombs is the airport, because everybody needs the airport. Well, and on planet Earth, this was called Uru Asa LM, Uru Dragon, Asa Queen of El, place of phase shift, Jerusalem. And the reason for the war was access to the Stargate. So, the war is over the Stargate. That's obvious. Location, location, location in real estate. The Stargate's the value. And that was called Deep Space Nine, which is our last show, which is access. And the other metaphor that we will be returning to in our conversation is the wormhole that's connected at the plasma compression point will itself have intent. Remember the metaphor in the films Deep Space Nine, which Roddenberry wrote, oh, they got sucked into this massive wormhole and the bad guy chased them in. It turned out that the wormhole itself made the decision about who had pure intention. Hello. That means the wormhole itself is mindful, even if it's intergalactic. There's these great interstellar wormholes, and they're part of a giant mind, quite literally. But this is on a scale that's difficult for us to. But you see, the more the implosive the compression, the more the potential for mindfulness, which is why you and others have made good films about, for example, the face of the sun is itself a stargate to Andromeda, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the liquefaction plane, again, that surface of the fire. But so now we have some metaphors to play with. Maybe we're ready for our pictures.
Okay.
So I'm going to bring up Cher's. Oh, good. Okay. So
Oh, good.
the subject here is physics of stargates and portals, starts with the physics of lucid dreaming remote viewing. So our question is, what's happening at the surface of the liquid, the liquefaction point? What's happening there? And we wish to use the more than metaphor of the physics of what happens when you enter a lucid dream. That's our serious conversation here. And again, taking a closer look at the liquids, in the next slide, we're going to see here that surrounding the liquid here in the movie Stargate, there's an alphabet called Ophanium used to make this movie Stargate. Rick Hassan, my coordinator when I set up the media lab that became Gaia TV, helped produce the movie Stargate. And these letters that surround the Stargate are actually the Ophanium. This is the Ophanium sigil of truth. And later we're going to learn the symmetry of those letters of Ophanium are a hypercube, the arrangement of those letters in the tablet of Nelvaj. And the symmetry of the arrangement of those letters is a hypercube, kind of a tetracube makes a dodeca. And that actually is not just the tablet of Nelvaj and the Ophanium letters and angel alphabets, because angel alphabet is actually the plasma donut symmetry operations to make interstellar plasma bodies named angels. That's what angel alphabets are. This is all at goldenmean.info/Ophanium. So point being, for example, if you read down the letters of that tablet, Zafkiel, Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, Mikael, Gabriel, that actually the names of angels are simply the sequence of plasma toroid hypercubic symmetry operations to assemble plasma domains into implosive and therefore self-aware interstellar plasma. Angel bodies are big plasma bodies, you know, whether it's starts with a nomen elemental, and then you have the undies, and then you have, you know, so these are very intelligent plasma bodies, and they're assembled by this hypercubic plasma domain symmetry operations, literally donut tilting to make physics of alphabets. So when these plasma domains are, they use this index of the tilt angle of the plasma donuts to implode the plasma into that surface. And that sort of brings us to the Jodie Foster story that this is the dodecahedron she got in, and at the plasma projection point, the surface of the plane of the liquid, that's what's called the phase conjugate point, where the waves add and multiply recursively, constructively, and that's called phase conjugate fractal compression, and that's the reason gravity exists, but it's also the reason stargates exist, is that fractal charge implosion tuned by golden ratio to Planck, and all the physics of that, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. So by getting into an electrical compression symmetry operation, in this case, imploding dodecahedron, the waves converge, add and multiply recursively constructively, and not just the wavelength adds and multiplies recursively constructively, only possible with golden ratio, but the phase velocities add and multiply constructively recursively, and that produces acceleration of charge from compression of charge only in golden ratio fractal geometry, which is the only reason gravity exists and the only reason stargates exist. That's the point here, is that acceleration of charge towards center. When charge acceleration is indiscriminable from gravity, you know, Einstein agreed on that. So that compression operation puts the charge symmetry, visualize top-down view of E8, star mother, perfected charge distribution, star mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. So that's the top-down view, and that E8 symmetry, by the way, was later used to predict the symmetry of the entire subatomic zoo. So what we want to get to in showing a few more slides about that is the dynamics of the array that it's necessary to inhabit once you've achieved that compression. And that array is a fractal net of nodes. Think of it as Indra's net. And that is why, for example, later we'll see that the arrangement of masses in the universe is dodecahedral. Here is from Nature magazine, announced the masses of the universe are dodecahedral. And New Scientist magazine announced the universe is fractal. Hello. Oh, it might be the perfected fractality. Perfected fractality is the perfected dodecahedron. Now, the people who know why objects fall to the ground, excluding Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and NASA, actually know why the masses of the universe are fractal and dodecahedron, because that enables the charge distribution efficiency, which is a fractal longitudinal array, which is what makes gravity centripetal and therefore negentropic. Hint, the origins of mindfulness, the title of my book, Origins of Biological Negentropy. So the structure of that array is a hint or a clue to what you travel down in the wormhole between the entrance and the exit of the Stargate. The compression nodes in a fractal compressional array, which were correctly depicted as dodecahedral even in the movie Stargate. So we want to understand those array dynamics. Now here, I should have the slides, but originally when in anti-gravity in the world grid, they showed, Kepler was actually right that the planetary orbitals are nested platonics, because that is how gravity is created, because that tetracube nests in dodecacosa only by golden ratio, which is the only reason the atomic table exists. And actually, that is a correct prediction of planetary radii, all based on golden ratio, because it's the only way you get stable gravity. And that's also the way you get a charge distribution array through the superluminal compression nodes. Visualize infinite interdigitated stellated dodecacosa called Star Mother Kit, goldenmean.info/kit, which is the only possible three-dimensional fractal. And you see, when you animate that revolution, you actually get the physics of the Holy Grail quite literally. And that array is where, for example, Bruce Cathy proved there was a reduction in nuclear critical mass in the Earth grid's dodecacosa, but also where Kozyrev proved that telepathy, military quality telepathy, was possible. You first had to find the dodecacosa nodes, also the only place you can build a pyramid or a labyrinth or a Stargate, because only there is successful compression possible embedding into that array. And it is the still points in that array that produce the distributed leverage, which is literally the wormhole. And that's what this slide is meant to convey. You see, the reason DNA, actually, a reason hydrogen radii, DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and the arrangement of the masses of the universe are all simply golden ratio pentodeca is because only that produces negentropic implosion, therefore successful charge distribution. And charge distribution success is the opposite of cancer by definition. Charge distribution success is actually the definition of the evolution of consciousness, which is simply distribution of charge that succeeds. and so when you go down that wormhole in that array, there are some tests. This is about you saying, well, in order to avoid getting dizzy, actually, it reminds me when Billy Myers was saying, well, most every day is when Semjase, who was actually Tegotten played, when Semjase would beam Billy Myers up just above Lake Maggiore there, I think it was, they beamed him up every day, but one day he arrived and he was upset and angry, and they couldn't beam him up normally.
Yeah.
And
they had for me.
They had to use a. Go ahead. Yes.
No, I need to calm down and relax before, otherwise it gets difficult.
Yes. And by the way, if you want to die successfully or have bliss successfully, the same physics applies. You need to become a compressible, shareable wave, which means process your anger, which means, do the collapse process on everybody you don't like and become a shareable wave. Otherwise, you're not compressible. Therefore, you can't be distributed. So you can't die well or enter a lucid dream, which is the same physics. Yeah. So anyway, so on the day that Billy Myers was upset, they had to use a different way of beaming him up. Was very uncomfortable, actually. It was very mechanical. So, and the emotion of anger, by the way, if you look at the Sentix literature, is 1/7. It's destructive harmonic interference, so it just doesn't compress well. Where the emotion of love, golden ratio, and the way you would hug someone, moment of maximum pressure is golden ratio in the hug that says I love you, by definition is measurable. And you can learn to do love hugging by measuring the geometry of pressure over time with the hug. goldenmean.info/touch, the Sentix literature. Point is, the geometry of the wave shape that we say is love is low phi, long wave phi ratio, it's perfect compressibility. It's literally, when you squeeze someone, and you said, you know, with your best love hug, and you asked, well, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? It's the same tingle you feel in a Stargate. Because the perfected love hug is implosive by definition, which is why successful birth is blissful, because the geometry of the birth canal reached also max pressure at golden ratio into the duration, which is also why underwater birth improves IQ, because the non-destructive decompression. But that's another. So we're getting ready to understand the array. That's the point of this slide. And the reason there's a picture of billiard balls here is because when you go into that array, there's a compression. So here's the second slide, which is the other liquid surface. And here is so this is the one of Jodie Foster's dodecahedron imploding. And here is the adding and multiplying of waves. Let me flip the slide, I'm sorry. And this is where the waves add and multiply by golden ratio, producing acceleration from compression. This is the Ophanian-Enochian, the sigil of truth. And these are the Ophanian-Enochian letters around the Stargate here. And this is the tablet of Malvage, the 8x8 array of the Enochian Ophanian, literally the angel alphabets John Dee used to communicate. And this is the symmetry of the letters in that array used to make the movie Stargate, which is hypercube. And this is from Vincent Bridges. And here, this is the tablet of Malvage, Sabkiel, San, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, Michael, Gabriel. The names of the angels are actually these symmetry operations. This is the geometry of that array. So, okay. So this is why this attraction due to gravity is the implosion that accelerates charge out the center at the Planck threshold into longitudinal distribution, longitudinal EMF being gravity waves. And it's that array that you need to inhabit when you lucid dream and when you go through a Stargate. And this is the Star Mother kit, the dodecacosa, the 3D fractal. Here is the dodeca geometry of the masses in the universe. This is the movie, the Nature and New Scientist magazine, showing the geometry of masses in the universe's dodeca and fractal. And so now we're back to where we were here. So this is the billiard. You see billiard balls here, right? The balls in a row. Yes. Okay. So the idea is that if you drop one ball at one end, when the balls are all touching each other, a billion billiard balls down the row, one ball is going to bounce off almost immediately. Whereas if you bounce two will bounce off at the other end, a billion billiard balls down the row. That's called a distribution efficiency. Now, if those billiard balls were not touching each other, and there was a millimeter between them, then when you drop one billiard ball here, a billion billiard balls down the row, it would take forever for the one to bounce off the other end. So it's the stillness that locks them together, which enables that charge distribution. Now notice that the masses of the universe arranged in a dodecahedron essentially don't move. They're relatively fixed in their nodal positions. What they're doing is they're inhabiting the array. They're enabling that distribution. Well, actually, what's happening as you squirt that inertia down that array, and now this is where we need just a hint of the advances. You see, yes, in the phase conjugation that makes stargates, in the phase conjugation which makes lucid dreaming, in the phase conjugation which enables bliss, and we're going to show you the reports of triggering lucid dreaming with phase conjugate plasma, verified.net. What's happening is, in the phase conjugation also, which is the mirror which enabled Nostradamus, and the phase conjugate mirror that John Dee and Kelly used, which was from the Aztec for scrying. And the scrying access to ancestor memory is the same physics. The ancestor phone calls happen because at the liquefaction point at the center of that mirror, phase conjugate mirror, which is sometimes called a time reversal device, and there's many stories in your literature about these time windows they use to see the future, etc. Yes. The first reports of time reversal and negentropy in modern physics is phase conjugate optics. And the phase conjugate mirror works like this. Notice that the side view is a caduceus called Hermes. otherwise known as phase conjugation. And what's happening is that most of the inertia in our, for example, all our electromagnetic communication radio uses the up and down component called transverse. So this is the transverse wave that goes up and down. Whereas once it squirts out through the center, actually at the Planck threshold, that compression down that perfected vortex, and the perfected vortex is the whole key to Stargate's perfected vortex. In fact, whole key to everything: alchemy, bliss,
perfection
death.
Perfection is stillness. So here we go.
Yes, and it's all about the perfected symmetry of the perfected vortex. For example, this is a side view of the equation for hydrogen radii, because that's the only way hydrogen makes gravity, and that's what hydration really means, enabling that distribution. So anyway, out the squirt gun at the center, and you see the two black lines here, which is the Planck threshold, which tunes every wave physics has ever measured. It's a music key signature of the universe. And at that Planck threshold, 1.61 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, that compression emerges as a longitudinal wave.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which is a compressional wave, where the axis of compression is parallel instead of perpendicular to the axis of propagation. Now, this perfectly describes sound waves, but in physics, most electrical engineers do not know what a longitudinal electromagnetic wave is, and certainly do not know how to send or receive one, okay? Except Kansius, who did hydrolysis like this, but that's another story. So the longitudinal component of the electromagnetic wave is the deep mystery, because it can pass through just about anything. Visualize Ingo Swann heating the thermistor, lighting a flame with his mind at a distance repeatedly through a Faraday cage called flameinmind.com. So we know the frequency signatures of the brainwave that allowed Ingo Swann to light that fire with his mind at a distance every time, which is this geometry of brainwaves, alpha, beta, called flameinmind.com, golden ratio, EEG. And, flameinmind.com is how we teach that. And it's also how we teach kids how to see without their eyes. They inhabit this array. So what happens is that the compression that then becomes acceleration allows a propagation of a longitudinal coherent EMF out the other end of perfected compression. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? I'm just going to come back here just for a second. I mean, this is getting a bit theoretical, and we really wanted this to be practical. And so I'd like you to ask yourself, what is the difference, everyone that's listening, what is the difference between when you are able to lucid dream and when you are not? And I would like to suggest to you that, go ahead, maybe you have this comment. Do you have
it's a difference of brain waves, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, in fact, we know, well, let me just say, the golden ratio cascade alpha to beta, frequency harmonics in the brain waves, which literally defines the perfected Schumann harmonics. They are the same. That alpha beta cascade in brainwaves is the Schumann harmonics, literally golden ratio tuned to Planck in both cases, which is the origin of biologic negentropy, the title of my book, That Implosion.
That's it.
So we know by experience now, and I'm going to get the slide out in a minute, that Therify.net plasma, which is plasma that's been triggered by just those frequencies in the infrasound, replicably triggers lucid dreaming. I'm going to show you the report in a minute. And we know that that frequency signature identifies the moment that the trance state of the kids who are blindfolded then report, oh, a vortex just showed up inside my head and I can look through it like an eyeball and I can see without my eyes, which is called the cause of perception. The reason perception exists is that vortex wormhole in plasma forming inside your head. That's the reason eye vision exists.
Can I make quick two observations? When
Please.
I was connected with the 9, which are plasmic supraconsciousnesses that are in a void behind the vortex, yes, the lady Una from the Intergalactic Conversion, she actually passed a finger through my head, and I think she touched my pineal gland, and I just I saw a vortex, and a vortex exploded within my head. And I was like, my consciousness was projected, not my light being, not my astral body, nothing, my consciousness was projected through this vortex. And I was
Beautiful.
at the place
Perfect.
where the 9 were. So that's one observation. And the second
Perfect example. Perfect. Yes.
Second I forget. Anyway.
I'm sorry. But and so now if I'm an electrical engineer, and by the way, I am, and I need to understand that, what do I say? Well, actually, we have something to say. And that is that starting with lucid dreaming, but ending with bliss perception, even hallucination and lucid dreaming and remote viewing, that the onset of the moment of sight at a distance is when the aura becomes compressed enough and compressed symmetrically, for the same reason the first atomic device was named implosion. The compression had to be symmetric. When the symmetry of the compression is perfect, which phase conjugate lasers is a perfect example, it's called 4-wave mixing. When the compression is perfected, visualize bliss experience, then the density within triggers the moment of a propagation where instead of the electromagnetic field propagating from the aura, propagates instead of as transverse electromagnetics, which frankly don't go far enough and can't achieve action at a distance and can't achieve perfected charge distribution. So the transverse wave just ain't going to do it. It's the compression wave, which can compress symmetrically from opposite directions, which can trigger that moment when the electromagnetic bubble, visualize literally a ball of light, begins your aura, literally. You are a ball of light. That's what you are. Your aura begins to propagate coherently in this longitudinal EMF, which was literally what's called the Ba from the Ka in Egypt, what's called the rainbow light body in Tibet, what's called the Keshban body by Gurdjieff. We got too many names for it and not enough physics. So the coherence of that longitudinal EMF propagation is the beginning of the moment you inhabit that array, because the longitudinal wave can propagate through those nodes. And the proof of that is the fact that the lucid dreaming, the healing, the remote healing so well reported with Therify.net works better when you're at the sacred site, literally the magnetic cross points.
Yes.
Kozyrev showed that you needed to place your lucid dreaming device, in this case Kozyrev mirror, which is, we know the microwave, which is ADP. We know the physics of how the Kozyrev mirror made telepathy so dependable. It always had to be at these sacred sites.
Yes.
Which is the compression nodes, which is exactly where even Freddie Silva agrees that all the ancient stargates had to be set up.
Yes, 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 yes.
At the compression nodes. Go ahead, Yujua.
We had this conversation by email. I told you about this.
Oh, yes.
With the bubble, this bubble's inside. Yes. And you know, I have this one which is open, and I think it depicts it better.
Beautiful.
And the god Zeus holds it like this, and it's like a sparkling
yes,
thunderbolt,
exactly.
and it's thing of power. And in the Indian tradition, they just locked it and to lock the power. But it's the two compression vortexes creating this bubble in the middle. So I like that. And that represents a graphic you showed last time in our last video as well.
Yes, which is kind of the Grail animation, the bubble in the center. That's exactly what. And so holding the center of that double vortex is what gives you leverage, right? And Zeus is probably related to Enki in the story. We can even do personalities around that. And the crystal is the toy stone, the fire crystal, and the Girku. And so have we got enough sense of this that, for example, if you wanted to practice lucid dreaming, which we think is excellent practice for using stargates, actually, that you would have some practical ideas. And there are many people who teach lucid dreaming, and we just add some aspects of the electrical engineering to understand how it works. For example, Agnihotra, Therify.net, and lucid dreaming and telepathy, and stargates and portals and sacred sites and cathedrals and labyrinths, they all do better if they're at the magnetic line cross point. Say, at sunrise and sunset, which is,
Between.
remember, four-wave mixing, phase conjugation. That's the physics of Agnihotra, which is plasma phase conjugation. Why you make fertility with plasma in Agnihotra. It's literally right angles. It's called four-wave mixing in physics. In the, Aboriginals, or they call it the sacred four directions.
Yes, yes. Shamanism, we have a lot of this.
Yes,
same.
they had a lot of it right. And it also works better at solstice and equinox.
Yes.
All of those perpendicularities, and that's really kind of the physics of astrology once you understand the physics of gravity bubbles. So this is really, and even in astrology, you have the pent versus the hex. I mean, the pent versus the square. The square is stressed because a square wave literally produces octave ratios, maximum destructive wave interference. So if you have the hex without the pent, it freezes and stabilizes and fixes, which is the hex versus the pent for not just a witch, but an electrician. The pent is used for distribution, implosion. The hex is used for stabilization. So snowflakes are very stable. So, and even in DNA, there's a hex versus a pent part of every ladder rung, and there's a reason. And if you build your house in the pent, you want total sharing, no secrets. In the hex, you want secrets and privacy.
Yes.
So when the witch puts a hex on you, it creates octave harmonics, which maximum destructive interference, which is the physics of crystallization.
Oh yeah, a hex or a curse. It's the same physics. I mean, it's quantum physics. You need,
that's right, it's wavelength.
Yeah, you need energy signature or DNAs, with DNAs also energy signature, frequency signature of the destination point where you want to connect, and whatever you do at A, B feels it automatically.
Yes.
That's
and that's the beginning of a description of action at a distance, which Einstein called spooky only because he didn't know how longitudinal EMF coherence works, which is the physics of the action at a distance, which is inhabiting the array. So that hopefully having a little more insight into how the array works, we could go back to our slideshow. So here's the four-wave mixing in the bottom right. That's supposedly how a photon is produced by phase conjugation. But bottom right, that's also top right, that's how lasers make phase conjugate optics in four-wave mixing. That's literally the sacred four directions. And the top-down view of that cube is hex, and it's the physics of why there are three pairs of primary colors. So this is the section on the plasma vortex pair called the Orion complex, from an ancient Japanese woodcut of two pairs of plasma vortex making the Stargate of Orion, obviously, and we just talked about that. And I think with one of these, there's a zoom in one of these. My animations aren't working, but it doesn't matter. So this double light cone of the Orion concept was called the Antarian Conversion, basically the Antares, the Orion Stargate. And Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, the three belt stars, were central because this is the Stargate, basically, which, as you have talked about. And this, you see, is a gravity lens. And that's what this is talking about, the geometry of Rigel and Bellatrix, the double Stargate.
Interestingly, Alnilam at the center of the Orion belt is the siege of the Council of Five. So just mentioning it.
Right, and there you have the center of the Stargate portal, where the pine cones kiss noses. And so this is talking about the major masses of Pleiades, Orion, and Sirius being approximately a 60-degree light cone with respect to the solar system, which would make us the fulcrum of that great cone, which the Hopi called the Peshme 10, 1 less than 10, the way of the 9, which is the gravity lenses of the 9 plasma toroids we talked about. That
last time.
9 3-dimensional.
Pesh in ancient Egyptian meaning 9, number 9.
Yes. Well, in this case, I thought in Hopi, Pesh May 10 was 1 less than 10, or the way of the 9, if I remember from. But anyway, that's why I understood how the syntax worked. And so this was this conversation about the Stargate. Now, what we didn't do, we showed this was how those light cones make that swastika, which is literally a map to how you made the Mercury vortex make gravity, even the Nazis. And it was basically based on the swastika, which in Bon Po, which is the Tibetan meaning literally bonfire, and they used a truckload of herbs to do acupuncture on great earth nodes, and they call giant dragons. And so here's the Bon Po version of the swastika, which is actually the Grail animation, which is how these stargates work, which is literally the Bon Po, the bonfire is literally the flame in the mind, but it's a great interstellar mind.
Oh yeah, interesting.
And this is from the physics of how that perfect nesting, originally this is from the book When Time Breaks Down, The Origin of Cardiac Arrhythmia, the physics of the electrical origins of the human heartbeat. And we use this to teach the physics of compassion, which is, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. And what's happening, if you measure it actually, is the nested vortex cones are turning inside out recursively, constructively, to the point where the power spectrum, the EKG, becomes harmonic inclusive, which is implosive, which indicates and measures the moment of compassion, which is that inclusive implosion, which is also the fastest way a doctor can measure immune health, is that harmonic inclusiveness. Yeah. That's all at realheartcoherence.com. But notice that's the beginning of implosion in your own heart, and it's those heart harmonics which tune your sacrocranial liquid, which is the physics of Kundalini, that little pumping mechanism, goldenmean.info /Kundalini. We have all the sort of wave mechanics here.
If
now,
I may,
I got my, go ahead.
So, excuse me, Dan, if I may interrupt you boldly. In shamanism, the heartbeat is the base, the rhythm of the heartbeat is the base for the shamanic drumming that will induce the trance. So
exactly.
we will double it, you know, or quadruple it.
Exactly. And that's the point. And that drumming of the heartbeat is how the Tibetans help you through death, actually. And it's also how you measure when the EKG coherence has imploded the DNA recursive braiding measurably, how bliss measurably braids and therefore programs DNA alignment. It's a low frequency coherent phonons. And the measurements of that, again, are all at realheartcoherence.com, inflameandmind.com. So this is the report from therify.net of replicably and recursively, well, at least repeatedly, triggering a lucid dreaming process. And it's just coherent plasma. We got these plasma light bulbs. I don't know if I should have a picture of plasma bulbs here. Therify.net. And it's, for many have some bliss experience and rejuvenation experience. We think it's the real basics. There will be more power density here for rejuvenation in the sense of medbed. But the closest I think we have on this planet right now to medbed is therify.net, actually, which is literally time reversal in the sense that physics is now clear. Time reversal only means negentropy. You can't time reverse to disorder. No, 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 doesn't happen. You can only time reverse to increased order by definition. So anyway, the fact that we can trigger lucid dreaming repeatedly in a plasma field is some proof of what I'm saying about a phase conjugate infrasound implosion.
Explosion, yeah.
Compressing the aura to the point where you have more lucid dreaming experience. And this is the slide then of the, this is from flameandmind.com/outer vision, where we teach kids to see without their eyes by measurement. And when their brainwave harmonics far right, the alpha beta cascade, this is the alpha in green, beta in blue, and gamma is up here top in gray, around up to 80 hertz. But those cascades in brainwaves, the golden ratio and octave cascades, basically the brainwaves implode. The kids go into a bit of a trance experience. Then they see this tornado, plasma vortex open inside their head, and then they can see without their eyes. And seeing without their eyes, the kids have been doing this for, you know, decades. It's very famous and very common. And we know that you need a relaxation trance to enable. And now we know that they see this plasma tube open in their head. But now we've documented the brainwave signature. And Korotkov started that work. He also identified golden ratio and EEG. So that's all about the flameandmind.com. Another indication that the lucid dream, the remote viewing, and seeing without your eyes are all triggered by this moment when the compression enables the squirt gun in the plasma tube to propagate coherently longitudinally. So this is the idea that actually the cause of vision itself is this fractal conjugate implosive field, for example, 30% of people who go into Therify report some sharpening of vision. So when I did a whole presentation to a university group, you can see it at therify.net, on the phase conjugate cause of vision. And this is the Hopi story of the right angles. So the only other part of this slideshow, the visions, the slides that we haven't looked at, is this thing called consumed perspective. Let me see if I get the right slide here. Yeah, it's here. So you have this recursive braiding in the DNA causing this implosive cone in the DNA. And so basically this is called fusion in the blood. The bliss causes this implosion, and your DNA recursively braids and becomes toroidal and implodes. Fusion in the blood is the name of our article about extraterrestrial history. That bliss is the trigger, fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. And what that does point achieve, perfect collapse at the fusion point.
Oh, yes.
This is when John Dee was studying scintillation as a way of calling angels and ancestors. He noticed that the scintillation point was a way to call angels and ancestors. And then he designed this tower in Rhode Island. And we have a film on this on our YouTube channel from James Egan, who is an expert on this. And so there's perfected collapse at this fusion. This is also called the pinhole camera. But there's a tower in Rhode Island, which is based on this principle. And there's pinholes in the side of that tower. And you see on the other side of the pinhole an invert mirror view. And this is the beginning of how you understand the perfect mixing at the compression point at center, which creates a fusion phenomena. And what's fused at this point is literally what's happening at the liquid surface of the phase conjugate mirror, the liquid surface of the Stargate. Remember, also, we should say that when JP reported that sphere of water in the star portal in the arc under the Bermuda Triangle, they were hearing a deep, low-frequency sound. Now, I actually have equations where I would predict what the frequencies of that sound was.
Yes, I remember
that. That if you see the low-frequency sound called infrasound, if you know our friend Sam in the Bosnian pyramid was trying to figure out why everybody came there for rejuvenation, and then he measured the infrasound in that pyramid, and he figured out why everybody was getting younger. People come from all over the world. Well, that's infrasound, and perfected infrasound actually is golden ratio times Planck, which is how Therify works and how bliss works. So the low-frequency sound is what converged at the liquefaction surface, and the map to that convergence. Remember, I talked about the letters of Ophanim and Nochians, which are labeled, which by focusing the plasma to converge at the focal point of that liquid, enabled the implosion at the phase conjugate point, the surface of the bubble, where you are compressed and accelerated into an array. Now that array, each of those nodes is occupied by compressional longitudinal waves at multiples of golden ratio times the speed of light. Remember, proof that phase conjugation times golden ratio is the cause of gravity is the fact also, not only is that the radii of hydrogen, but Raymond Chow's measurements of velocities faster than light, very famous, all centered around 1.62 golden ratio times c, the speed of light. So multiples of the speed of light times golden ratio is what accelerates through that fractal dodeca array. And that's what accomplishes that superluminal linkage down that wormhole, an infinite series of harmonics golden ratio times the speed of light, which is propagating in that array, which is inhabitable. I mean, this is advanced. There's no question. This is advanced science.
Can I make an observation, please?
Please.
I was told that we need a frequency key to activate a Stargate. Yes. And this frequency key will contain the frequency signature of the destination where you're going. It's made with sound frequency, holographic holograms, and geometrical mathematical formula related to geometrical patterns.
Yes.
And that will imprint, that will activate all the little particles in the fluid, and it will vibrate them and calibrate them on the right destination. How do you comment on
Yeah,
this?
that's literally correct, but we could be far more specific. What we know is that frequency signature is Planck times integer exponents of golden mean ratio, named phase conjugation fractality perfected, which is the origin of biological entropy, the title of my book. That is clearly the equation that would predict those frequencies. Now, it happens that the low frequency components thereof, for example, the infrasound that makes Bliss and Therify.net work, that's universal. But the high frequency components, which frequencies you choose up the megahertz scale, etc., have to be a perfect match between the send point and the receive point.
Yeah.
It's literally how IP protocol works on the internet. Okay. The send point and the receive point are programmed by a numeric map that identifies the mathematical signature of the destination versus the send point. Well, it happens that you're squirted into this array. Where are you going to come out? Well, it turns out the place where that infinite perfected compression can emerge non-destructively is only where the complex high frequency signature perfectly matches from send point to receive point, actually. And to engineer that, basically, you take Therify.net, which already makes lucid dreaming, and you make the phase conjugation more broad spectral and higher wattage, you have a Stargate. But then you have to match send point to receive point, which is literally how you program the Stargate to work. And by the way, this is going to be much easier if it's at a place where nature already has enabled non-destructive compression. For the same reason that when Korotkov followed the Kogi to where they make phone calls to ancestors, and he measured every time, the air there is fractal. It's literally sacred space.
Yeah, as a shaman, we traveled through trance, throughout what we call the tree of life and the shamanic tree, to go and talk to the ancestors. And so
exactly.
there you go.
And ancestor memory travels in that array. In Australia, they call it dream lines, dreaming track song lines. In America, we call it, magnetic lines, ley lines, sacred sites. It's dodecacosa for the Earth grid. And that is ancestor memory because that longitudinal array is the collective unconscious, the Akashic records, the communion of saints. It's a specific kind of coherence field. And to embed in that, and every Aboriginal can tell you, if you can't make a phone call to your ancestors, your life is worthless, actually. And they're right, really, because that is the survival library of 1 billion years of evolution. If you don't have a library card, the Aboriginals know you didn't do much with your life. So you need a library card. So anyway.
They actually walk and sing the lines. They say they sing the lines.
Exactly. And they call the rain that way. And you can see huge storms down the line when the ancestors die. And when you do rituals to heal the men and the women, they make huge rainstorms. It's amazing stories. And we did that. So this was called the symmetry of entry and exit, which is the archetype, which I call the alphabet of the heart, which is the title of my first book. That if you make a map of those symmetry possibilities.
Field effect in all of matter is organizing towards stillness.
So you take that torus.
Stillness is organized in the 7-color map, and that's self-organized.
And you have Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet.
If we tilt that golden spiral,
so that's self-organizing.
And the symmetry leads to the tetrahedron.
And
the index of those tilts or nest angles for field effects creates the sacred alphabet of symmetry, which was the mnemonic device for teaching us to orient our conscious focus concentrically, grabbing the throat and align feeling focus or consciousness as a factor.
And so that same alphabet literally became Sanskrit.
ABC. The skilled intergalactic navigator surfs gravity waves by getting a phase angle of tilt with respect to the onset charge, and that's called the ABCs.
Simple as ABC.
The symbols of the Stargate, yeah.
So this was not just the Sanskrit, but and the turning inside out recursively, which was the Hebrew word breshith here. And so the symmetry indexes to compress you into that array is stored in ancient alphabet. And in pairs of letters, the small letters versus the capital letters are a double pair. And if you rotate that torus, this animation is supposed to play. Oh, there it goes. And you see that this is also in the shape of the pelvis and the Sufi heart with wings.
Oh yeah, totally.
And so this was basically
womb.
three-dimensional wave mechanics stored in sacred alphabet. And we call this the glass bead game. And yeah, and here just to show the connection to,
That's
in Hebrew, the tagin or crownlet top left indicated your relative axis through the three arrows of the tetracube. Whereas in Sanskrit, the same letter, the indication of your relative tilt in the tetracube is the vertical and horizontal bar. But it's the same index to plasma symmetry map, literally a tetracubic phase conjugate array. And this is true actually in Old Hungarian as well. Rovás-írás is the same physics, it's tetracubic.
Now I have a question for you, Dan. These languages, Hebrew and Sanskrit, which are all the letters are encrypted symbol that are frequency routes throughout portals. Do you think this was created by humans of Earth or offered by extraterrestrial intelligence? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think you're right. There's tens of thousands of humanoid species in this galactic sector alone, and we'd be pretty we'd be pretty bold to believe that we created. No, that's interstellar origin. And actually, remember that same tetracube is the index to nesting DNA codons. They're tetracubic. You know, the I Ching is DNA codons. It's the same thing, tetracubic. And so this is a programming alphabet for DNA braiding, obviously. And this is interstellar for sure. And there's more to this too. That I don't have the slides in front. I could dig them out. But if you pronounce Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet accurately, the spectrogram sonically is the picture of a letter optically.
Oh, wow.
Aleph, yeah, I should be, the pictures. It's all at goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet was pioneered by Carlos Suarez, but then Fred Wolf replicated. And then I replicated in my first book, Alphabet of the Heart. I had a lady from Jerusalem who was able to pronounce the letters powerfully, like they did when they sign off on Jerusalem TV at night, actually. And we produced the spectrograms. So the sonic shadow is the optical shadow. So you could talk to your computer. It spectrum analyzes your voice, and that's the machine code. It's pretty cool. And this could be good or evil. I mean, this is obviously the ultimate machine intelligence, but it is also the self-organizing symmetry of tetracubic arrays. So, in the strictly tetracubic sense, Hebrew was, you're stuck in a cube. However, you take the superset of the same phonons, you get Ophanim Enochian, and you get the angel alphabets, and then you went from hex to pent, which is the astral hygiene solution to the Merkaba, going from hex to pent. Otherwise, you're susceptible to parasites. So it's the same physics. Actually, if you don't implode, you're toast. Otherwise, you can't sort the parasites. In other words, no bliss, you're in trouble.
Yes, that's fantastic. But yeah.
So we haven't really, now we've set the stage for a conversation about stargates and portals, but we haven't actually.
That was just a warm-up.
Well,
you were just warming up. Yeah, so
well, go ahead. Well, just, if you're imagining, then you're preparing for a lucid dream, and you know that you need compression in the aura, which is a coherent aura, the same way you'd prepare for bliss or death or a wedding or a stargate. get compressible or get dead. And so that astral hygiene discipline of preparing, organizing your aura is to be prepared for compression. Now, the psychology of this is centered around a kind of a Sufi metaphor, which is that when you enter death or bliss or ancestral memory or the array, only the shareable wave survives. Now, in physics, we finally learned what a shareable wave is. It's implosive compression into phase conjugate fractality. Enter the array. That's called perfect charge distribution, the perfectly shareable wave. What is that in psychology? That is a memory which contains pure principle survival information for the collective. So, you know, this array of the collective unconscious is a single coherent ancestral memory, longitudinal electric field, which is fractal, is measurable, which has been gathering a library of survival information for 1 billion years, and there's a ticket to get in and get out. And that ticket is, are you a shareable wave? I mean, do you have pure intention? I mean, do you have pure principle? I mean, do you have a memory that serves the survival of the collective?
Yes, yes.
So, go ahead.
DNA carries memory.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to be trained in shamanism, my grandmother, who trained me from the other side, she told me, oh, the tree of life, which is the double conic vortex, the tree of life is not actually somewhere in a physical place. The tree of life, you have it in all the cells of your body. It's in your DNA. That's where the tree of life is. That's where the portal is. Now that makes so much sense.
Well, it's beautiful. There's a 3D animation of Tree of Life. goldenmean.info says Tree of Life. We could dig it up, but just a hex and a pent rotating, and they phase lock, and you see the hex and the pent view, and you see the whole Tree of Life in 3D. Which fits the Kabbalah. It fits this metaphor, which is implosion. It fits the metaphor. It's beautiful. Yes, yes, exactly. And to think about the psychology of the situation, here's an exercise that might be relevant, which is, they say that every day before you go to sleep, and you think of this as preparing for a lucid dream, if you could play your day as a movie in front of your mind, just close your eyes and play your day like it's film. And if you can watch that movie without interrupting, very hard to do. Because every time you get to something that trips your trigger, you get distracted and you think, oh, blah, 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 blah. Whereas if you could just relax and watch the whole movie play for the whole day, that means you compressed and distilled every experience into pure principle, and therefore a shareable wave. This is called having no charge on it, which means no anger with respect to any memory. That means you've digested your day. That means compression has been successful. The pure principle has been distilled out of every piece of every experience, and it's perfectly ready to be shared into this implosive library of survival memory, which is the collective unconscious. And this is why, and the last slides now in my slideshow are the geometry of death. This is why the sequence of visions you will see in the death experience are well known. It's called the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants. We talked about them before, but literally, measurably, successful death is an implosive charged black hole. That's why death visions are electrically contagious, as beautiful Ray Moody so well proved. Surgeons proved that the death visions are contagious. And there's, you know, all the surgeons in the room saw the same vision when this beautiful lady died. Why? Because death is a blissful black hole, because the memories are, and that's also why you see your whole life compressed into 2 seconds just before you die, because you got to do that compression. Otherwise,
that's so yeah, sorry. Oh, but that's so interesting, because every time I have a contact with the 9, in a fractions of seconds, it's like time out of time, I see my life going by, like if I was about to die, obviously. And at first I thought, oh, they're scanning me to see who I am. But no, it repeats every time. It goes maybe a fraction of second, but in this fraction of seconds, everything is contained. And
exactly.
They have no interest to know about my life. They don't care. It's just a phenomenon that occurs naturally. Incredible.
Yes, and so it's like for you to enter into their mind, which is this huge array, you got to do the compression good, actually, because all of that information has to go into that compression and distribution, into that perfect holographic fractal phase conjugate array, and that's distribution. And if there's any anger or a wave that's not shareable, it ain't going to go good.
It doesn't work. The vortex doesn't open, and even, you know, I suppose it could go wrong, probably.
Yeah, Yeah, and this is the physics of preparing for death, and we had some visuals around this, and this is the last part of the, so and from Stargate's Portals keynote. So the last slides here, then here is,
Here we go.
do you see this this ghost, a plasma cloud that looks like a man, bottom right?
Yeah.
Now that would not be visible in a hospital, because the hospital's electrosmog would prevent the plasma from converging coherently. However, if you die in nature, which is where orbs are visible, the plasma is distributable and enabled. It's called a phase conjugate or high dielectric array. So these are multiple pictures of the ghost leaving the body at death. And rarely could you get this in a hospital, because a hospital is hell. I mean, hospitals, electrosmog means so the successful death and birth have the same physics, basically. And this is the natron salt in mummification achieved the implosive capacitance, which enabled. So literally, it was this was the physics and the alchemy and the process of mummification. This is why, for example, mummy powder was in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. It was the gold powder. And it wasn't the fact that the Egyptians were eating the gold powder. No, the human flesh was alchemized into a gold powder Ormes amulet by the implosive capacitance of the natron salt, the alchemic implosive capacitive physics of mummification.
It's like a battery, in fact, this salt.
Yeah, but it's a centripetal implosive, a non-destructive compression charge battery, which is the physics of alchemy and the physics of transmutation. In this case, why the mummy had gold powder. And this is called green line and red line in perfect death equals perfect shrinking, even in the Tibetan tradition. And also why it's been measured replicably that when saints die in Tibet, it causes rainbows. And we teach the physics of that the rainbows that happen when a saint dies actually is because they add implosive phase conjugate charge compression to the atmosphere, which is the physics of the reason color and rainbows exist. That's all at fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. So here is Korotkov, who I've worked with for many years, Professor Korotkov, and here he's measuring death. And he's measuring where the ghost, the plasma body, goes at death. And he determined that, in fact, the plasma ghost goes to the place called sacred space or charge compression in the room, the place of power, because charge implosion releases ghosts, because that's what you need to be distributed. That's also why Therify.net is so famous for releasing stuck ghosts. Where if someone's having strong aura and bliss in a room, they can release stuck ghosts because they can implode and then be distributed. And if you have enough pure intention not to get caught up in the astral streamers, you can do a lot of service by releasing ghosts in this way. So this is also Korotkov. Sorry?
Can you I have a question. I've released a few ghosts from places, and the thing is, I need to know their name. If I don't have their name, it doesn't work. I need to pronounce their name to release them. That's interesting, the sound and
I like that. I like that, because indeed they need to get so focused and assemble their memories, so the pronunciation of their name brings them to enough focus to their memories that they can begin to bring them to one point, and that would then enable them to implode and distribute. So the name would be symbolic of the the identification of. And the phi denting of the soap bubble is how it implodes, You identify, you dent by phi ratio, and you turn inside out, basically. And also, this is Korotkov measuring the time it takes for the ghost to leave the body after death, corresponding to the Tibetan Book of the Dead quite well. And he used cadavers for this. And it's true that if the death was peaceful, then consistently the ghost would leave the body at 10 and 36 hours after death, actually, religiously, literally. And there's a reason for this. The aura has to have time to metabolize, implode, and the Tibetans would use a thin film of gold coating around the body, and that would also capacitively implode, et cetera. So there's lots of ways, but the physics of death has a lot to do with charge implosion. That's so. And you know, the Sacred Mirror's wonderful artwork displayed this very well, that what happens at death is the plasma implodes into a fractal of distribution. But the sequence of vision that you see at death, very famously called the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, we later learned what that is. That's actually the sequence of right angle recursive braid operations of DNA imploding. So the lattice is literally tetracubic. Then when the cube tilts up and rotates, it becomes pentadodeca. So that's lattice turns into a cobweb, which is literally the next dimension because it is the next superposed axis with charge spin symmetry, only possible by golden ratio 2 cube to dodec. Then you ratchet that you ratchet that dodec down a helix, which is how you map DNA, and that's the tunnel. So you went to the next dimension, literally you superpose the next axis of spin symmetry, embedding embeddability, and then the helix comes to a point, is braided into a spiral, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, is actually the DNA adding sequence of superposed spin operations to braid implode recursively, which is literally imploding your DNA. And that's what brings you to that centripetal still point to enable the implosion, which is successful death, because that's the moment when you dissolve into the surface of that bubble. So we see the connection between successful death, successful lucid dreaming, remote viewing. Remember, remote viewing is also triggered by golden ratio and brain waves, the same way you can achieve seeing without your eyes. So that is the liquefaction point at the surface of that bubble. So that's the beginning. And where that bubble connects to is the wormhole of that longitudinal array, that perfected distribution.
Okay, well, would you say there is a difference between what we call a wormhole? What I visualize like a wormhole is like in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It is it looks like a black hole without singularity. You can go through. It's a shortcut. You know, it's the story of the sheets of paper and the shortcut.
Yes.
I see a wormhole like that. Maybe I'm wrong. And I see a Stargate like a teleport door. Am I right, or there's no difference?
Yeah, well, what we're saying is the connection through the center of the wormhole is the nodal array map of the places of perfect compression. So for example, the wormhole would go, here's a Sufi exercise. Trace with your attention the center of gravity from the center of your heart to the center of the earth, to the center of the sun, to the center of the central sun. So that's increasing layers of recursive compression, and that each of those centers of a vortex have a larger and larger array of distribution. And when you go from one to the next, that's the next higher level of bliss, literally. So a practical example of that is Bentoff, my teacher, who wrote Stalking the Wild Pendulum and the Biomechanics of Kundalini, all at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. So there is Bentoff in his Kundalini. He wakes up and he realizes aura just got big enough so he could kind of wiggle, and he realized he could see and feel the whole planet as a body. And shaman like that, they can wiggle the planet, they can move things, they can make storms the size of continents. This is real, this is not subjective, because they become the center of a very large plasma tornado. The next thing that happened, he asked for a book, can I see through the eyes of the earth? And that's what the book Cosmic Comic Book, his second book after Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Biomechanics of Kundalini, was. He was seeing through the eyes of the earth, and he saw the interstellar wave mechanics as if seeing through the eye of the sun. And you know that's the Anu, the 7 spins, 5 spins, human heart, and the heart of hydrogen, all that same Anu symmetry. And that's called sun god, the origin of every single religion. And you yourself, they taught that was, in fact, the heart of the sun was a stargate. And every shaman experiences the heart of the sun as cool and inviting. It's literally an eyeball.
Yeah, it's cool. It's not it's not hot. That's what's
No.
impressive. Yeah.
Oh. But when we led shamanic journeys in through the heart of the sun, I would say even most people came back dizzy, honestly, that they weren't ready for that, actually. So the shaman, no, and we started the solar heart community, solar shamans are looking through the heart of the sun. You can do these shamanic rituals, but to get there, you know, grounding, hydration, the same things you're talking about.
Yes, when when I do shamanic journey, as far as I want to go, as deep as I'm rooting, because it's symmetry, and
Mhm.
because if I go farther than the powerful of the grounding, you know, the power of the
Exactly.
grounding, I can get lost. So
Yes,
it's a symmetry. It's
exactly. Yeah,
again
and
the tree.
so that perfected grounding is what gives you leverage, and otherwise you don't go nuts.
Yes, symmetry, the tree. That's funny.
That's right. It's a
That's a good
beautiful
one.
metaphor. Yeah, yeah. Yes. And so swimming in a live river, or you know, anything that's excellent grounding gives you leverage. So I had notes. Did you have something else? I just wanted to go down my notes here. But did you have any other comments before?
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, I think it's a lot to take in for people who are
Yeah.
listening to this about
Yeah.
stargates and wormholes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we wanted to. Yeah, please go on. Go on.
Well, just
want to talk about
to
something.
finish the lecture notes, so
Yes.
this lecture was supposed to include the anti-gravity in the world grid story by Becker and Higgins, where the Tibetans would line up around a cliff base, which happened to be piezo, and they'd have all their cacophonous din musical instruments, and they would play them loudly at the right phonon piezo distance from the cliff base, and this giant rock would float in anti-gravity hundreds of feet up the cliff, and they made a gravity wave, which is very simple, similar to the concept of Stargate. And the story is well described in detail. I mean, this is reported in detail to the British Royal Society. This is not just a, you know, and
Well,
so we were talking about, go ahead.
It reminds me of the Moa of the Eastern Island, who are said to have been moved by sound of
Yes.
Voices. I don't remember.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
And yes, and even those who, the ancient ones who said they saw the rocks floating to make the pyramids in the Stonehenge, they said they heard sound. Yes, similar to the sound they heard at that bubble of the Stargate. But that sound was a phonon implosive, and implosive sound is real and it is longitudinal, but that is a metaphor at one level of the surface of what is accompanying a much more powerful longitudinal EMF coherence accompanying that sound.
Yeah, because it needs to cancel mass.
Well, what's being canceled? See, mass is a name only for the inertia stored by rotation. That's what mass is a name for, and nothing else, right? And so it's true that mass is being, but really what's happening is that the inertia of charge that was rotating, named mass, the gyroscope of that rotating inertia of charge, that inertia is named and defines only definition of mass. But when that same charge implodes through center, out through Planck, squirt gun at precisely golden ratio times Planck, into that longitudinal array, suddenly the charge has someplace to go out through center of the squirt gun.
Yeah.
And this is Einstein scratching his head saying, I know gravity is infinite non-destructive charge compression, but where does a charge go? And because Einstein didn't have an answer to that question, he never figured out why an object falls to the ground. Now that we know where the charge goes through center, hydrogen radii, Planck times golden ratio, there's the smoking gun. The charge goes down that perfect light cone, implodes out through center, and squirts through the speed of light into a longitudinal array named the gravity grid. So once you know where the charge went, you can know why gravity exists, and you can know how stargates and portals work. Because that's the squirt gun. It's the same squirt gun. It's just broader spectrum.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, it makes sense.
So we were supposed to talk about the Ophanin. We talked about Billy Myers. We talked about JP. Oh, yeah, we were supposed to talk about Swaru briefly. Just that Swaru is probably an example of too much time travel producing soul fractionation. We know that when our friend who really taught Gosha, who got pretty confused, or the original Swaru actually was researching the nature of consciousness in a black hole and came back dead. And then when they reconstructed her from her ship's computer, that's when Swaru became AI. That was the bad news moment. That was the branch of the takeout.
It's making so much damages. And
yeah, that's right. That's what made a mess. But the point was that how her soul got fractionated in the first place. Too much time travel. We also know that we think she was responsible for the death of her own mother. Actually, it's quite a messy story.
Yeah, I'm not sure about all these things. You know, it does.
Yeah. But the point being, the metaphor here is the reason that time travel can be soul fractionating. That's something to meditate on. Even when the Templars said, you know, the wound in the astral bubble of Earth that caused too many Greys and Dracos to become parasites here, because the astral etheric plasma bubble of the Earth developed holes after Montauk time travel experiments. So suddenly the aura of the Earth has holes in it and invites parasites in. The Templars named this the repair of the fabric of time.
Yes, you open doors and anything can come in.
That's right. That's right. And so this is a pretty high level advanced astral hygiene. But you see that so if you're doing this time travel repeatedly, and you know, your whole soul doesn't come through in these artificial portals, actually. The soul is designed to propagate organically through these naturally occurring interstellar portals. And there's a lot of deep hygiene to this. So that was, let's see, what inhabit the array, dodecahedral universe, insolubility, deep space wormhole, difference with Stargate. Oh, difference between Stargate and a time mirror.
Yes.
So basically, these, for example, when Nostradamus learned to put the phase conjugate dark coating on the bottom of his water scrying cup to see the future, that's an example of a time mirror, which is a phase conjugate mirror, which is the real, you know, why the obsidian mirror of the Aztec enabled John D. and Kelly for ancestor phone calls and angel phone calls, because it's a phase conjugate mirror, which means that is a node at which the longitudinal array impinges and therefore communicates. So there's a whole aspect of astral hygiene. I think we talked about this, that if you use a phase conjugate mirror to externalize your foci, as John D. and Kelly did, there's astral hygiene messes. They got involved in the black goo.
Yes. You need to, well, what's important is to go within, to go throughout the compression node within, and not expand outwards, you know,
externalize.
If you externalize, you create holes in the fabric of space-time, and you have no control who will just want to come in and parasite
and holes
you.
in your aura.
Yes,
exactly.
That's what you always, before undergoing any experiment, journey, astral decorporation, anything that involves altered state of consciousness and going somewhere else, you need to be sure that you are in a clean environment, safe.
Yes.
That's what, as a druid and shaman, we always cast a sacred space before doing anything, smudging. Always have this 4096 hertz fork. I just remove everything that's in the air, and then once you're safe, you're in your castle, don't open any window, go in, go within, because whatever the protection you have, or however clean and good you've built your fortress, if you open a window, you know, what's the point?
Yes, exactly. So we're saying that the ultimate source for this communication mechanism is your own bliss, your plasma fire inside.
Yeah.
And if you're going to project it outside, you might need more astral hygiene skill, actually. And so the mirror is inside, and we understand. So that's an introduction to the difference between a Stargate and a mirror. So the next was about wing makers. I don't know if you know wingmakers.com, but what a wing maker is. And they actually talked about the turning point being blank state technology there, which is this memory wipe technology. But this solution to the...
Tell me about it, please.
Wingmakers.com. Wingmakers.com was basically discovering what later became Ophanim Enochian. It's a Stargate, you know, a wing maker is someone who can make plasma wings, right?
Yes, like Enki.
Yes, but when in that case they're talking about when they first met the ETs, the competition between governments was access to what they called blank state technology, and blank state at the military level was the ability to memory wipe, which we know is this mess that started all the schizophrenia and the SSP experiencers. It was really bad news. But at a deeper level, what is a blank state is entering the 0 point at which you actually have communication. So, you know, there's a good side and a bad side, the blank state. And so that's sort of in relation to the black goo phenomenon as well. So the other thing that we were supposed to mention was just the physics of how a pyramid works. The pyramid was designed so that the golden ratio Schumann harmonic cascade could implode pump the piezoelectric infrasound. And that would, they used liquid mercury a lot of times, and that would then pump out the longitudinal array, which is with a global power grid without wires, clearly succeeding. And this was actually the Galactic Federation, long before the Egyptians used the pyramids. Oh, yeah. The Federation was building them. Yes. And they were building to make a global power grid. And this was called the Hummer, actually, in the book 2/3 by David Myers, David Percy. And the reason they called it the Hummer was because its piezo resonated the infrasound of the planet. And that's why the height of the pyramid had to be golden ratio times the base to make the piezo infrasound cascade pump implode out the longitudinal at the center. And incidentally, that's just one more thing I was going to mention was when Dan Willis was talking about Marcel. I knew Marcel probably longer than he did, although I think he knew him better, Marcel Vogel. But the Vogel crystal, you see, he called it the C-axis. It's really called the Z-axis. The Z-axis of the piezo quartz, when it's compressed, the piezo low-frequency component of your EKG, for example, will pump out a longitudinal wave. And he tried to explain the physics of piezoelectricity, but anyway, the point is that what's enabling, and I was there when Marcel repeatedly influenced the plant polygraph, Cleve Baxter, I knew him very well. And Marcel Vogel worked up a terrible sweat doing that work, actually. It's kind of sad because that's when his astral hygiene was so bad and he was so overweight and a lot of story. I knew him in Toronto and then with the psychotronics. But the point behind that is that Z-axis of that quartz crystal could pump out a longitudinal component. And that's what entrained that plant at a distance, actually. And if you study the physics of piezoelectricity of the Z helical axis of the quartz crystal, you can understand how that pump wave is pumping out a longitudinal wave at the end, which is also how the pyramids work.
Yes, yes. Well, I've been shown a device. I've been shown how these energy generators, as they call it also in the Federation, these pyramids, four-sided, these are Cheops ratios. They were used, this kind of pyramid, as energy generators. There's a big crystal in the middle, and it actually floats. It's anti-gravity, it floats. And this big crystal, the top 1/4 of it is under the pyramidion. There is a different structure, pyramidion, different metal, or anyway. All around, there are either 6 or 8 other crystals pointing towards it, coming from the ground, okay? And in the prolongation of these crystals, there are frequency generators. So what I've been shown is it was people standing behind all these crystals around, and they had rods, and they were hitting the ground and chanting at the same time, vroom, vroom.
Oh, yes.
And
I heard you tell that story.
Activating
yes.
the small ones who are sending a ray of energy, frequency or whatever, to the big one in the middle, and the big one would create frill.
Vril, which would be longitudinal propagation. Yes.
And it would be gathered in the pyramidion, and then the pyramidion would gather the energy, it would go there, and it would be sent by resonance, quantum resonance, I can explain it like this, to anything else, devices, whatever they want to power with it. So how would you comment that?
Well, yes. So what you're calling Vril, I would say Vril is precisely a longitudinally coherent EMF wave, which is the physics of gravity waves, which fits the Vril story. And where it's propagated to is every other identically matching frequency node for longitudinal propagation, exactly. And by the way, in the Giza pyramid, I think it was lapis on top and the 157th volume, and the 157th, that was quartz actually. And that was a very broad spectral implosive capacitor, which was propagating at very high voltage longitudinal wave, which enabled a whole planetary grid to, they had power without wires at every one of those nodes. It was a very functional global power distribution system without wires, among other things. And it was also a place where you could propagate your plasma soul into the Sirius or Orion, where it was pointing to at the right time. It was a squirt gun for the aura as well.
Hint to the vortex, the Orion vortex, because Cheops
exactly.
is El Nilam, the center of the Orion belt.
Exactly, yes. And one other thing, according to our teacher on this Egyptian, Vincent Bridges, who's very famous, that rod that you describe hitting the ground with was called a was scepter.
Was scepter, yes.
Yes.
Scepter of power.
And in Egypt, that the rattle at the end was actually had piezo rock crystal in it. And as you know, even these devices they used to hit the acupuncture meridians, it's a quartz crystal that is vibrated to make a spark. And so the was scepter was, and these were used at the magnetic lines, and they were used at the sunrise and solstice, and they would amplify. So yes, that story fits very well the physics, I think.
Fantastic. Oh,
there was just one last thing. I just,
yes.
I had notes for the fun stories here.
That's great.
But another, just if people want a practical example of a global instant communication system that was attempted and failed, if you know of Hartmut Müller, famous global scaling, he had from Germany, he had a global instantaneous cell phone system that would do global instantaneous communication. And few people understood, but it was based on longitudinal interferometry. And almost none of the electrical engineers even know what longitudinal coherent interferometry is. But that was an attempt at an example of a serious instant global power and global communication system, instant, based on coherent superluminal longitudinal fractal interferometry. And by the way, he failed. Well, it's true. Hartmut Müller was put in jail, and there's conspiracy theory. Well, but actually he did. He messed up his investors. He didn't do it right. But the physics behind it, instantaneous global communication based on longitudinal interferometry, we got to come out of the Stone Ages planet Earth and understand the physics of the collective unconscious, because that is the next step past the internet, and that is coherent longitudinal fractal interferometry.
That's
the ancestor memory, the access point.
That's what the Starlink satellites are preparing us for the quantum internet.
Could potentially be the ultimate quanta. Obviously, is the phase conjugate point. So that's which is the longitudinal array. And lastly, that then introduces what I'm proposing, possibly with Freddie Silva himself, and you maybe at some point. But when Freddie Silva, I like Freddie, and when he talked about the secret of the Templars was. He says, the secret of the Templars was they would carefully engineer a serious near-death experience, which was risky and messy, and you could kill somebody. But they had this particular poison they used. And apparently, I think Freddie's right, the Greeks knew about it, the Egyptians, all the great initiates knew about it. And this was really what the story of Jesus going to his death for 3 days. It's the same story everywhere. And the story is, if you can do a near-death experience well, 3 days in the underworld and 3 days, and it's a metaphor that goes through every religion, then you come back with knowledge, contact with the array. And I can even tell this story at this moment. I need to thank my father. When he was young, he had a near-death experience, actually. His name is Eugene. I'd like to honor him at this moment. And he had a deep spiritual perspective through his whole life. And he had that near-death experience as a teenager, a nasty car crash. And basically, he was considered dead in a hospital for 3 days. And he woke up, and suddenly he was back from the dead. And his life was he always had a deep spiritual side, and everybody loved him because they could sense that connection, And so this is the fun part. So Freddie is saying, well, all the ancient religions were actually about, if you can do the near-death thing well, then you come back, and then you have a better life, you have more perspective, you have you're communicating with ancestors. So surviving death before you die.
That's it. That's the shamanic experience. You know, the god Odin. That's what he did. He hung himself at a tree to really go near death. Or it is said he died nearly. And then when he came back with knowledge, the knowledge of everything. He could know and see everything.
Death on the cross of the conjugate cross, you know.
Yes. And he hung himself to a tree.
Yeah,
that's important.
Which means the tree of life, the still point, the cross point, the four-wave mixing, whatever you want to call it, to be able to embed and enter the stillness and come back aware. But remember, you can't go into that still point unless only the shareable wave survive. Pure intention required. Anyway, so that's supposed to be the happily ever after.
Yes. Well, that's fantastic, because a last remark. It's when I underwent my awakening, the great awakening. You know, we all go through this at one stage. Nearly everyone. I switched off brutally, and it was the void. Nothing. I was nothing. I switched off, and from there, it's like an hourglass, you know. From there, I rebuilt myself, but with the awareness came with it. It was different. It was like being reborn. So that I want to not say that as well.
Yeah, you
Feeling
rebuilt
like
yourself.
You go to zero, totally
die
zero.
to yourself. Yes,
yeah.
A total bliss point, which is the physics of Kundalini, the physics of near-death experience. And Freddie calls it the lost art of resurrection, actually. And what came back from the dead was the perfected memory of that embedding, that connection to that array, ancestor memory, Akashic records, communion of saints, whatever you want to call it. And that means every experience then in life can be compared with reference to. And then the little things don't bother you anymore.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, and you know, the little things didn't bother my father anymore after that, you know.
See, that's absolutely fascinating.
So I was lucky.
Well, then it's been an amazing journey through portals and stargates and wormholes together, and with the audience with us, bringing them on our ship. And is there a last thing you would like to say, or an advice or something before we start?
Well, you know, just the philosophy of what we're doing here, which is that as we grow up as a culture, spiritual experience becomes more beautiful when we understand the science, and not less beautiful, because more loving, actually. And then miracle worship and personality worship and religion wars, they're just immature, they're childish. Instead, as we inhabit the pure principle, the aura goes so much further, actually. And so when we believe in this great collective intelligence, actually, we come to realize the universal mind is actually loving, and you can relate to it personally.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. We'll continue to have some more fun in other videos.
Sure.
And thank you so much. I hope everyone understands better the dynamics and the science of stargates. And to the next time. Thank you so much, Dan Winter. Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings. People can reach me, info@fractalfield.com. And we have more fun to come with Elena, because there's some major stars that want to join our conversation. So we're cooking.
And all the links to all your websites are under this video. And
yes,
please, everyone, check them. There's plenty of info and developments on what Dan spoke about. So thank you very much. Thank
blessings.
you.
Thank you, Elena. Blessings.